People need help on DMR. So I am Bob, KD2BKD. Thank you, no more, for the introduction. And this is the Kawfee Talk. So again, I was licensed in 2012. I'm interested in VHF. I like to rove. I did not get a chance to rove this past weekend. I set up a outdoor station in my backyard and was quite excited about the opening on 6 meters on Sunday. But let's get, if anybody wants to contact me, I'm available at emails, KD2BKD@ARR.net, and also at yahoo.com and optonline.net. So the images of this presentation, I just basically took off the internet, and I'd also like to thank Steve, KC2IRA, for reviewing and his input, because we've already did this. So thanks, Steve, for that. And I'm not going to give the credit to the people of making all of this stuff. So if you did, digital mobile radio, it's like DStar, which is the ICOM, and Fusion Yaesu. And there's also, what is it? There's a Kenwood version also of digital radio. Digital radio, the actual radio converts your analog audio signal into a digital signal, and it sends it out that way to the repeaters. They can be networked together. There are ways to connect DMR to Fusion and to the other and combine them. I don't know how to do that, not there yet, but this is basically very basic on just programming the radios. Just wanted to touch a little bit about DStar, that there are others. I'm not familiar with these other type of digital radio modes. So DMR, one thing you get in DMR is that the signal does not degrade that much. So if you're talking to somebody, you're either going to get the signal or you're not. It's not like, oh, you're coming in not so clear. Oh, it's starting to get a little scratchy in that. All of a sudden, it's just going to like drop. It's either there or it's not. So you can get a further coverage on DMR, but when you drop out, you just drop out of nowhere. So that's what this slide shows. So analog. So I'm hoping that most of you knows how to program for an analog repeater. You basically need the RX frequency, the TX frequency, and a PL tone. DMR is a little different. You do have this RX frequency and the TX frequency, but instead of a PL tone, you have a color code. The color code is not a color, it is a number. I don't know why they did that, but the color code is a number. I believe it's from 0 to 9. There's also talk groups associated with it and time slots. So time slots, I think I have a slide over there that explains the time slots, that you can actually have two conversations going on at the same time on the same repeater on the same frequency. So before you even get involved in DMR, you have to get a DMR ID. If you go to radioid.net, you don't even need to own a DMR radio. You can sign up for a DMR ID. So when you do get your radio, you'll have it. I had mine a week or two. I ordered my radio, then I went to radioid.net to get my ID. And that's how they keep track, basically, of that. And there's a database out there, and you can search radio IDs. You can also search by call sign and see what somebody's radio ID is. If you program the radio with the call signs and radio IDs in there, you can see the call signs and the person's name on your screen when they are transmitting to the repeater. So talk groups is basically a way to organize specific radio traffic. So they're different examples are they're divided into different countries, states, regions, and interests. So different talk groups are like worldwide. If you were to key up a repeater and go to the worldwide talk group, now that repeater would need to have that talk group available to it. Not every repeater has every talk group available. If you were to key up on worldwide and key up and say, call your sign, this is KD2BKD, is anybody out there? You could be keying up repeaters all over the world and get anybody. The transmission is going through the internet, through major data centers, and it's going all over the place. North America, it's just North America. Once you make your contact, then you try to figure out what is the least, the local group that you can talk on. There's also different kinds of called attack groups. Not sure what that means. Maybe somebody else does, but attack groups are typically available out there too. So here's the time division multiple access. It supports 2 simultaneous conversations as it alternates the signal in 30 millisecond intervals. So time, and also when you program your radio, the time slot and the talk group much match the repeater settings. A talk group on one repeater could be in one time slot, and if you program it in for another repeater, it could be on time slot 2 instead of time slot 1. So this has to all match. If it doesn't match, I don't know, you may be able to hear somebody, but they're not going to be able to hear you. So that's sometimes is a problem when somebody's programming a radio. They don't have the proper time slot associated with the proper talk group for that particular repeater. So basically, this is how it works. There's a repeater. There's some DMR network, some data center here, and another repeater. So this particular one, you would have to have the RX and TX frequency of repeater A, and you would have to have the color code of repeater A. That talk group would have to be on that repeater, and you'd have to have the time slot for that repeater associated with that talk group. And on the other one, you would have the opposite over here. And then your communication will go through. If something here is not right, it's not going through. And the talk group is actually over the internet. Before I had my radio, I was looking into how to program these radios, and some of the people out there making presentations on this it could be quite confusing, and I try to get to the bottom of it and see what it really is. So why is DMR difficult to program? It's really not that difficult. You just have to understand a few things. DMR was originally designed for the commercial radio industry, so try not to understand everything and the way they are, because some of the stuff is just not applicable, and you just have to take it for what it is. Talk groups need to be set up before you actually create a channel, and I'll show you that. And the receive groups also need to be set before you create a channel. On a regular analog repeater, you just put in the frequent receive, transmit, and PL tone, and it works. No, you already have to have the talk group in the data on the program. So that means that the programming of DMR radio seems to be backwards, because you need to have the talk groups and the receive groups already programmed or set up before you actually create a channel. So it seems backwards, but once you get used to it, it makes sense. So here's a repeater, a local repeater here in Paramus, the KM4WUD, which is a networked repeater. The frequency is 44150 with +5 offset. The color code is 0. This is the different talk groups available on there. So you have New York Metro, and there's also access. If you see access, full-time user activated. Full-time means that if somebody didn't activate one of these other, and you'll see that the time slots. So if the repeater's just sitting out there and nobody's actually activated a specific talk group, it's going to be on the New York Metro talk group. You can drive around if you have a DMR mobile radio and go to talk group 444 on this radio, and you'll hear it. But if somebody else is using this particular repeater and says, I don't want to use the Metro, and you may be having a conversation with somebody on 444, and somebody says, I want to go to North America and key that up, it's going to drop time slot 1 for between 5 and 10 minutes. So the user activated a new time slot. That's a disadvantage to these things. I have been on nets many times and talking on a net, all of a sudden the net is gone. But I also had 3 different repeaters that I could go to get that same talk group in the area. So that's how I dealt with that. And down here, you'll see that there's a time slot for number 2, the local repeater. So this is not actually being networked. That's full time over here. It's not networked there. It's just radio to radio. That's the way that the Bergen FM Association repeaters are set to at this time. There's a New Jersey statewide and North Jersey. I'm gonna show you examples to program in the North Jersey talk group. So this is the radio I have. It's right here, the TYT. Still works. It's a 440. Typically, DMR radios repeaters are 440, but there are some 2 meter DMR repeaters out there also. So this is programming based on this particular radio. So basically, you go into and you have to download their particular software to program it. And the first thing you're going to need to do is put in some basic, or basically you need to check the basic information, the frequency range, the model name, and that. So that's, I guess that if you uploaded from your radio, this information would come in automatically. That's how I typically do it. So it knows the information about your radio, and then you can go about programming it. So next, what you're going to need is under general settings in this particular MD380 software, the radio name. I put it as KD2BKD, and my radio ID is 3142-766. Nothing else was changed here for setting up this radio. So now you need to create what they call a digital contact. So this is your transmit. This is who you're actually transmitting to. You only need to, so I put the name as NNJ. The talk group name is NNJ-13342 because that's the talk group ID. It is a group call, and that is the talk group number. In this particular radio, it does not have a separate area to put in the person contact's name. So I'm just using as an example, Nomar's NP4H. I found out his call ID is 133-4749. You make that a private call. So when he makes a transmission, instead of his caller ID will come up, but his call sign will also come up. If you don't do this in this particular radio, only his call ID will come up. There are some ways, like down here I wrote, there are new radio firmwares where you can download the complete DMR database, not requiring to put in individual contacts. I have done that. It works quite well, so that you don't have to type in all of this stuff. But there's probably close to, if not more than 100,000 DMR users at this time. And you also, for instance, on this group, you only need to do it one time. If it's on more than one repeater, you only need to do it one time because you already have that talk group in there. If this talk group's on another repeater, as long as it's in the name, you have the caller ID, the call ID in there. That's all it's going to use. So you only need to do it one time for each talk group. Then, now you shouldn't have to do this, but this is just a commercial radio thing and the way I do it. So you need an RX group too. That was a transmit group. This is an RX group. So I just make the digital RX group list. I give it the name, the same exact name I gave to this, the digital contacts. I make it the same name and I just associate it with that so that when, I guess in the commercial world, this can be associated with different things, but you always want to talk to the same group that you're receiving from. Little confusing, a lot confusing, but you just have to take it as what it is. And it seems like you shouldn't have to do it, but you do. So after all of that, now that you have those two pieces of information, you can actually create a channel. So I created a channel and I call it NNJ for Northern New Jersey channel, and I put it as a -KM4WUD because it's on that particular repeater. You say that it's a digital channel. If you wanted to, you can program analog channels in here too. You would put analog, and all of this stuff would go away, and only and you'd see this analog come up. So you put your RX frequency, your TX frequency. The criteria is going to be color code. This one does it a little different than the other radio, as you'll see. I put the contact name as the NNJ talk group and the group list as the NNJ. So these two, this, like I said, you shouldn't need to do this, but you do. The color code is 2 and that repeater slot, the color code is 0 and the repeater slot is number 2. So that's how you make a channel. And the channel, then you got to go down here and say add, and it'll add it to your list. You still can't use it. Now you have to associate it with a zone. If you uploaded all that information into your radio, you'd look at your radio and say, I can't even get to that channel because everything has to be within a zone. So I made a zone called KM4WUD, which is all the different talk groups. I just have the one talk group in here today, but you would, and it doesn't have to be, your zone doesn't have to be WM4WD. You can call it anything you want. I have one called favorites. So it just has my favorite talk groups from different repeaters in this area. So I don't have to go through all these different zones because and the other thing is this particular radio has a max of 16 channels can be associated with a zone. Well, and I probably have 10 different zones programmed in. I may have to push a button to loop around to toggle through all of these different zones to get to the right one. Some other radios will allow you one giant zone, but then you got to think, oh, if I have 1,000 channels programmed into this thing, you'd be looping a while. So that's how you, so after that, then you can upload this into the radio. To do that is up here. You write to the radio and that's how you start off. That will give you that one particular channel. This is what my particular radio looks like, my MD380. You can see these are my digital contacts here. How many zones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's more than 10 zones. That's not a live video. So this is all the different talk groups and stuff that I have programmed into my radio. And maybe if we create a DMR special interest group at Fairlawn, we can create our own DMR, what is called a code plug. This whole thing is called a code plug. So if anybody's out there is wondering what a code plug is, it's basically the file that you put into the radio to program all these different channels. So now we'll go to the Anytone. This is when I got into it, the TYT was the popular radio to have. Now I would say the popular radio to have is the Anytone. I'm looking at my next radio, which I want to be this Anytone mobile radio. That will be my next one, I'm guessing. So so we'll go over how to program this handheld or this one. It's going to be very similar, and I hear that if you have one programmed, there's conversion softwares. So here in their program, you pick the model number and you say that it's the US version, and this is the frequencies and that. So that's how you set up this particular radio. You just say model and that, and you can actually put passwords. This radio has a lot of features that it just has a lot of features. I don't think I would use a lot of the features, but they're there. Here you can have radio IDs. The TYT radio has one radio ID you can program into it. This one you can have a list of different radio IDs for different members of the family. So if somebody has a ham radio license with this radio ID, you hand it off to somebody, they can select what radio ID they want to use if they have it. So you can have multiple radio IDs in this radio. So you just type in the radio ID in this, and you can have a list of those. I don't know how this particular radio works. I'm sure some of you out there may have it and be able to answer those. Now here, talk groups, they actually called it talk groups. Unlike the other one, they called it something else. Similarly, I called it that same particular name. It is a call group, and I gave it the DMR ID. I did not put the NOMAR in this group because they do it a little differently, as you'll see. So that's how you create a talk group. And next, they call it a digital contact list. So this is where I put NOMAR. I put him, he's in Englewood, New Jersey. There's his call sign. That's his DMR ID. It is a private call. And you can put your list in here. I am guessing that the Anytone has a way to upload the complete DMR database, so you don't have to do this for each individual contact. I'm not sure. I don't have one of these. And again, you have to do this receive group list just because this was a commercial thing. So again, I made it the receive group name, the same as the talk group name, and associated with them. Kind of should not be there, but it is. And again, you create a channel. Without that previous information of the call group and the talk group, you couldn't do this. So I called it channel name, the same thing, Northern New Jersey, and the repeater call sign. The frequencies are here. The channel type is going to be digital. This one just assumes it's a color code. It doesn't ask you what type of system it is. It's in slot 2, and the receive group list is here. You don't have to put the talk group list because it already knows that the receive group list in that receive group list is already associated with the talk group, with this talk group. So you don't have to do that. So there's two things you don't have to do on this radio that you do on the other. And again, you can't use it until you create a zone. So I created a zone, the KM4WUD zone. I put that channel in the zone. After you put I don't know how many channels you can put in the zone in this particular radio. And you download it. to the radio. You'd send the data to the code plug. You send the code plug to the radio right there, and it'll go, hopefully, and everything will work out okay. The other thing about DMR radios, so I had problems getting into a certain talk group. At one time, I had the K2 Mac repeater, which was on the Empire State Building. I had one repeater, which was in Orangeburg. And the other one, was it that Paramus repeater? Or was it the Montclair? There's another Montclair DMR repeater. I forget, which I had this particular talk group all put in the channel numbers next to each other. So when I got kicked off of the talk group on one repeater, I could just go to the next channel, key up, and I would be on that talk group, and I can get my net back in, and I can listen to the net and see what's going on. With a hotspot is like your own personal mini repeater. It's milliwatts, and this is a couple examples of them. This one is actually one of those little tiny Raspberry Pis. I built one of these, and you can buy the board. You can build this for well under $100. It works okay, and it uses Wi-Fi. So this antenna picks up your 440 DMR signal and send it over the internet through Wi-Fi if you're, and you can actually link it in cell phone mobile data, which is interesting. You just need to supply some power to it. This is another one. This is a Raspberry Pi, and I believe that's the same board here that's inside this one. You don't have to have I don't have the display, but the display will tell you what talk group you're on. This is a commercially available one. It looks like somebody just built one. Maybe there's a Raspberry Pi in there. It's already done. This is another one. It's the OpenShark. I don't have any. I know people that have these and use them. I don't know much about them though. And then this OpenSpot 3. That's a very interesting one. The OpenSpot 3. It's totally self-contained. Battery built in. You charge it up. Has Wi-Fi, so you can charge that up. You can link it to the Wi-Fi of your cell phone and use your mobile data plan. So you put this in your one pocket, you put your cell phone in the other pocket, and you have your HT, and that's all you need, and you can be on any talk group you want as long as you have mobile data. So those are interesting. That's the latest. This is I don't know, $200-300, I think. So that's about hotspots. So basically, DMR radios are taking that radio signal and putting it over the internet. If anybody has any questions, or I know that Dave has some additional information on how to possibly program a DMR radio with some fancy ways over the internet, maybe. I don't know, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask now.
Okay, well, before the questions, let me talk about something that, by the way, Bob, that was an excellent overview. And the reason why DMR appears so complicated is because it is not designed for the radio amateur. It is a commercial system, which happens to be, fortunately for us, workable in the amateur bands. But there was an organization that is out there that has taken things to the next level as far as DMR is concerned. Radio Oddity makes a radio called the GD77, which is a typical commercial DMR radio, like the Anytone, like the whatever that's out there. But there are a group of guys led by a guy from Australia who's got a VK call sign. His name is Roger Mulhorn, and a Brit by the name of Ian Spencer, who have written a software package called OpenGD77. You get a GD77 from Radio Oddity, and they come in at a price point of under $99. You could get it in some places for $80 plus shipping and taxes, etc. And you get this software, you get this radio, you load it with the firmware that these guys make, and the firmware is free. You program it with the software that these guys make, and you can essentially use that radio just like on all the DMR frequencies, etc. It's a DMR radio. You could program it with a code plug, very similar to the way Bob has showed you how the Uniden or his radios work. But the addition is, the game changer is that you can do this also on the fly from the front panel. You can program your talk groups on the fly. You can program your repeaters on the fly. You can adjust everything. In other words, use it as an amateur radio, essentially the way we as hams would use it, as opposed to a commercial radio. Instead of having one frequency per talk group, several frequencies for the different talk groups on the same repeater, you can have one frequency for your hotspot and all your different talk groups, one frequency for each repeater, and you could bring up whatever talk group you want. Here's the best part of this. Let's say you're in an area, you don't know where the local DMR repeaters are. You know that they exist, you've scanned by them, you hear the telltale DMR noise that comes down the line, and you don't know where it is, you don't know who runs it, etc. You don't know the color codes used, the code plugs. With this software, all you do is tune to the DMR repeater frequency, hit a button, it automatically finds the time slots the repeater is running, the color codes, and the talk groups that are running, and you could get onto that repeater by just hitting two buttons. It does all the work for you, and that's the game changer so far in the DMR world. They've just come out with this software recently, and you might want to make a note of this. The website to get the software, you can Google OpenGD77, OpenGD77. Or go to opengd77.com, and that tells you all you need. If you've got curiosity about it, feel free to email me. I picked up a GD77 and have loaded the software, and it's truly the game changer if you're into DMR. And also, just incidentally, for those who care, it helps me a lot. It can even be made to talk every function. So as a blind amateur, I can operate essentially all of the functions of the radio through speech, but you can shut that off if you want to do it just as a sighted person through the screen. So a game changer so far in the DMR world, courtesy these folks who are making the OpenGD77 software. That is what I bring to the table, and I figured that you guys would be interested in it. Back to you there, Bob.
Very interesting. Haven't heard that one. Any other questions, comments?
W2KBF.
Sure, go Carl.
Okay, this is risky. I don't know enough to ask an intelligent question, but that's not going to stop me anyway. I wanted to ask about private call. I'm wondering if that's like the call sign routing that other digital modes use, like if someone is in the same, listening to a repeater in the same talk group, not necessarily the same repeater, but in the same talk group, and you do a private call to them, does it find them on the network?
I've experimented a little bit with that. I don't have that much experience with it. I have sent text messages to people that were on that talk group at that time, and they got it, and we were texting back and forth, and I don't think it went to anybody else but that particular person that was on the that particular talk group at the time. So
I would assume yes, Carl.
Okay, so it finds them, and it sounds like it's private though. So it's only the other station that would get the audio or get the text. Is that correct?
I would think so.
Ah.
Yeah, that's correct, Bob, because some repeaters don't have private call enabled. Some do, some don't.
Okay, then let me ask the skunk at the picnic question then. How is this different from encryption if you're sending a private message that only one other person can hear?
Well, if a person can, if that's why it's questionable. That's why some repeaters open it and some repeaters don't.
Okay, so not everybody's comfortable with it, I guess, is the answer. Thank you, Dave.
Any others?
Hey, Bob, it's Steve. Great job. You know, one thing that I found very helpful was kind of reverse engineering a code plug. Like if there's, you know, if building one from scratch seems like a daunting task, and it can be, there are links or whatever to existing code plugs that you can modify or customize for your local situation. For me, I found that to be very helpful, along with your presentation and the write-ups you've done. Great job.
Okay, that's a good that's basically how I got into it. I don't know if Marco's out there, K2ZMA, this evening. I invited him, and he is a member of Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. But that's how I did it. He sent me his code plug for the local Bergen County FM Association repeaters, and basically I reverse engineered those. And I'd also like to thank, if Kai is out there, and Jim, WA2UMP. Those are the three people that have helped me probably the most in getting DMR up and running, besides the videos I've seen online. Any other questions?
Well, this is Steve, KD2BKD. What I recently got this. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's an AMBE 3000 dongle. It's made by Northwest Digital, but you could also get them at Gigaparts. And what it is it's a USB. You plug it into your computer. You plug in your headphones with a mic, or if you want to use a separate mic and a separate headphone. You download this the software called Blue DV, and it allows you to connect to either DMR, DStar, or Yaesu Fusion, and you don't have to do any code plugs or anything. When you do DMR, it has a drop-down menu of all the, the chat rooms, whatever they're called, talk groups, and you do it that way, and that's what I do. And it's so simple. I mean, heck, I took it longer to download the software. And once you download the software, you go into settings, you click A and B, you put in your DMR ID, and you're done. Now, when it comes to Yaesu Fusion, I use this, the FT2DR, and a hotspot I made, and it's super simple, because once you put the frequency to match the radio to the hotspot, and then you hit the Wires X button, and you could get a list of rooms. Or if you're using the latest version of PyStar, there's a drop-down menu for all the, they call them reflectors, but they're the same thing as talk groups. And it gives you the whole list of all the Yaesu Fusion talk groups you can talk in. And what you do is you click connect, and it connects you to the talk group. And when you're done, you hit unlink, and it disconnects you. And it has the same thing, the parrot, so to make sure your BER rate, is working. And it's so much simpler, because I've been trying to wrap my head around this whole DMR stuff, and I can't figure it out. And like I said, I figured I'd go with the path of least resistance, and this is it. This thing makes it so much simple. And this was, I think, $90, and the software is free, and I was up and running within 15 minutes. So that might be something people might want to look into if they want to get into DMR. And like I said, it's just not limited to DMR. You could do DStar and also Fusion. And with Fusion, you could put in your user ID. And I think to use DStar, you have to sign, you have to create a DStar account. I forgot the name of the website you have to do that on. But once you do it, you just enter the information and you click connect, and it's done. It's really super simple. I mean, if I could figure it out, anyone could figure it out that way.
Can I add to that?
Please,
Go
sir.
ahead. Let's hear
Okay, well, Steve is right. That is a good way to go. And it's the same thing with this GD77. You could wrestle with codes plugs with other radios for days and days, but with the GD77, you just have to set up one frequency with, let's say, if you're running a hotspot, one frequency to your hotspot, and take about maybe less than 5 minutes, because you just have to set up one frequency, set it to one channel, one zone, and whatever talk group you want, you just punch it up on the radio. And I was up and running talking on DMR within a half hour of installing the new firmware and getting the radio programmed out of the box. So I highly recommend, if you're going, and this is just me, from my standpoint, if you're going into DMR and want a handheld, and it works on 2 N440, go with the GD77 for around $100. You can't go wrong.
Hi, Greg here, Kilo 1UH.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. I'm a Fairlawn member and spent time in Bergen County in Massachusetts. Glad to join in. I've been on DMR 3 or 4 months. One of the questions I had is, that I'm not clear about is the different DMR infrastructures. There's DMR Plus, there's DMR Mark, there's some European version, and it's not clear to me whether if you want, I've used Brandmeister and it seems to work great for my needs, but it's not clear to me whether these are overlapping networks or separate networks. And if you program a talk group like 91 on Brandmeister, if 91 on the other networks are the same or what. And I'm not talking about DStar and Fusion and NXDN and that, but I'm curious if you have insight on that.
I don't have insight on that.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Very good.
Okay, well, these networks are separate networks, but they are making arrangements to overlap certain groups, and a lot of the major groups are overlapped and shared in the major networks. And if you've got a hotspot, you can switch to all the major networks. They do accommodate that, whether it's DStar, whether it's DMR Mark, Brandmeister, which is the European one, the Phoenix Network, DMR Plus. So there's all slowly happening, emerging, and a coalescing of all the networks. But you know, like in amateur radio, everybody's got to do things a little bit differently. So you'll have split offs, and people want to do things differently, etc. That's why the different networks develop with slightly different philosophies and so on. And there are overlaps and stuff like that. So gradually, everything is coming together.
Yeah, very good. So K1UH, are you up there in, what is it, Nantucket?
Exactly, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Have you run into any DMR people up there like WA2UMP, Jim?
Oh yeah, on the Cape in Barnstable.
Yes.
Yeah, well, he happens to be near to a DMR repeater. I'm on Nantucket, and I don't have a capability of reaching the Cape.
Okay.
So I'm on a Pi-Star Zoom spot, and that's how I've been getting my connections. Yeah, I know UMP. He joins our net some of the time, but he tends to be on the Cape in Barnstable and Dennis repeaters and that. Yep, good guy.
Okay, he has a very good net that he runs on Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock for the Hudson Valley Digital Network. And he's also, I've learned a lot from him, and he knows he's a digital guru over there. He knows a lot about this stuff.
I appreciate that information. I didn't connect him with that stuff, but I know him just from our regular, nightly nets, but not DMR. Let's see. I have a couple other questions. So I have my Alanco DJMD5, which is really similar hardware to the Anytones, same code plug kind of stuff. There's interchangeability. It can hold 200,000 contacts like the latest Anytones. So the next thing becomes, if you want to do a mass import of the public database of DMR contacts, the private contacts, 160,000. Because if you get on worldwide, you're going to hear people in Scotland and Spain and all over and North America. The problem that I've found is that not all of the databases seem to be fully populated. If you do a database download from radioid.net, it'll have the entire table, but European and some of the overseas connections don't include things like the city, the town, the state. Now, okay, if you want to talk to a guy named Colin in Ireland, that'll tell you Colin, but it won't tell you Ireland, it'll tell you Great Britain. So I've kind of tried to search down a little richer databases than the various ones I had, and I haven't quite come up with a way to do that. Maybe it's my being a little compulsive about wanting detail that isn't really necessary to do a QSO on DMR. But, so I've been experimenting with that and sometimes getting frustrated and sometimes saying, just shut up and get on the air. So that's if you have any insight on which contact databases are recommended if you're going to do a mass import.
Okay.
There is a fellow in Holland that sends out what looks to be fairly complete and up-to-date and accurate every, I believe, week or every 2 weeks. I'm looking for his, his address to share with you. and it is global.
Okay, I have also noticed that that there is some lack of information, but I think that's because certain countries have privacy laws and don't require that information and to be and don't want that information to be brought out there to the general public of it specifically where it is, but just what country it is. But that's what I thought. Anybody else out there?
That makes sense. The other thing is that after you've done it for a while, if you get on the worldwide groups, there's the turnover in the DMR entries is day by day, week by week. So if you want to be pushing your updating your code plugs every 3 days and taking 10 minutes to get them to your radio, you start saying, you know, it's crazy. I know there's a thing called Talker Alias, which is the ability to basically have your endpoint, your radio, your HT, whatever, send a talk alias, which you can put in your call sign and your name, Kilo 1 UH Greg. And even if the receiving party doesn't have that in their latest code plug, it'll alternatively display your talker alias if it's missing from the database. So that's another interesting feature I discovered with DMR.
Yeah, interesting.
Question?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if people were paying attention to the chat because I put in a link to the Northwest Digital Radio's dongle, but also the free software, Blue DV. And if you click on the Blue DV Windows version, it'll show you, it gives you a screenshot of it, and it'll show you like how you could select whatever talk group or whatever fusion room or whatever DStar room you want to go to. And it's, like I said, it's super simple. And the software is free. So you might be in maybe $110 for the dongle, you know, and I think, like I said, Gigapart sells one. It's the same thing. It uses an AMD E3000 vocoder chip. So it's the same thing. It's just labeled, you know, one company. So it's like saying Chevy or Ford, but it's the same thing. So that might be something to look into. Okay, I'll go back to muting.
Thank you for a fine presentation.
All right.
The in the beginning you said if somebody from another talk or TAC group talks over you, you could lose the connection to the USO. How does that happen?
Okay, that particular repeater is connected to a specific talk group. And if somebody, and you'll hear that in the DMR world, the kerchunk, if somebody kerchunks that repeater to a different talk group, all of a sudden you're not going to hear anything anymore in your transmission. But if you key up, you can kerchunk him back. So it gets quite frustrating. But how many people are using the repeaters nowadays? Not so many, right? But I guess DMR repeaters are a different thing. I used to use the K2 Mac repeater at the Empire State Building, and I would be listening for like 5 minutes. And you also, if you don't key up and you're listening to a talk group that's not there all the time, after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on what the time is set, it's going to go away. So you have to kerchunk again. You got to key up and to replenish that talk group again, so you'll hear it.
Okay, it's yeah, confusing. It's confusing.
Yeah, but if you have a hotspot, your own personal hotspot, it's only you.
I have a comment, please.
Recognized.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Yes. Alex, recognized.
It's Alex, W2YJL in Schenectady, New York. Going back to the DMR IDs, as you had mentioned, not all countries list full name and address. Sometimes you'll just see the DMR ID on the screen. There is a method to find out who that is. If you go to the DMR ID list from that other computer list and type in the ID, you'll get the full name, address, and call sign.
Yeah, you can also backwards that you can type in their call sign and it'll tell you if they're on the DMR ID list.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and you can also search, how many people in this particular town have DMR IDs, and you can do it. It's similar to the FCC database, but it's for the DMR IDs. Any others out there? Okay, so there has been talks about starting up a special interest groups in Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. I don't know how many people are interested in that, but I guess Nomar can say how to start this up and where we can go from that, because I know Nomar is a DMR operator, and I believe he would be interested in this particular and special interest group.
Definitely would be very interesting, and I would encourage someone to take lead and start working. I would even suggest if you are interested in helping us get souls involved and wanting to join the group, you know what? We already have one, which is for radio receiving, and maybe we could have Dave or Ed talk to us a little bit about that particular special interest group. There is another one in the works for FT8 as well. I'm taking this opportunity to promote all these different special interest groups that are being born as we speak. And definitely DMR is something that it's up and coming, and I would definitely encourage us to continue and work on this special interest group. So Bob, if possible, and you could help spearhead this
Sure.
movement, you could contact Bob if you have interest in forming part of this group. You already saw his emails. You could he'll give them to you again, I'm sure. And if not, you could always contact me, np4h@aol.com or np4h@arrl.net. They either work. And definitely, it's very interesting. I am still learning as well. It's I have several radios of my own for DMR, and I am somewhat involved in a talk group. For those of you that are on DMR, I like to join in on a specific talk group, TG 3300, and it's what has been affectionately named the Paradise Repeater Network, PR as in Puerto Rico, but PR Dice. A good friend of mine, KP4EOP, has recently created the first all DMR digital network of repeaters in the island of Puerto Rico, giving basically island-wide coverage with several repeaters. So it's very interesting. Actually, I am looking to eventually, if this special group gets up and running, we could have Jay, KP4AOP, maybe join us as well, and talk to us about his experience as well. He has been one of my personal mentors, and like I said, it's something to still be learning. Bob, I want to thank you for such a interesting presentation. Like I said, this is something that with maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes, it's not enough. Like I said, I'm still learning, and I encourage everybody to continue. It's an interesting mode. And again, Bob, thank you for taking the helm of bringing us this topic, and I hope that we can get this other group up and running very soon, Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. So we really appreciate the evening of light that you have provided us. Anyone else that might have any last minute questions for Bob or comments on DMR, please go right ahead, my brother.
Okay, Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock, I run the Bergen County FM Association DMRnet, which at this time is only available through RF. So if anybody is in the Bergen County area, or we are using the Franklin Lakes repeater, which is at the stables, that goes on for about a half an hour from 8 o'clock till 8:30. And we talk about all kinds of things, mostly about DMR and stuff, but anything amateur radio. And you can email me to get on that particular email list at KD2BKD@ARRL.net. And I will put you on the list and remind you about the net every week.
Bob, let me ask you a question. And this actually goes for me as well, because I have not experimented a lot in DMR at the local level. Normally, I have an open spot. One, you know, the original one, I have an open spot. Two, normally the communications I've been doing through DMR are, you know, through reflectors, etc. My question to you is, and I know it was touched upon briefly, is there like a collection, and not only for me, but for those that want to get their feet wet here on DMR locally, is there like a collection of code plugs with the meats and potato repeaters, so to say, here in the area that could be shared in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, if we make this special interest group, that will be the first thing we do. We're going to make a code plug just for the area. I do have a lot of the information of this, which is like a mix mox of stuff, but that'll be the first thing for that. We'll make a code plug with that particular parameter repeater. The Bergen County FM Association is a nice one in Montclair, nice one in Orangeburg, and there's a bunch more in the area, and that I think would be the first thing to make that. So that's my idea for that.
That would be a great starter. Now, you touched upon, and Dave as well, and I want to thank Dave for his input into AAM. You touched on the two most common or most entry-level radios, so to say. Is there any other that you might recommend? I know that and by the way, I have both. I have the MD380, and I don't have the 878. I do have the 868, which is basically a very close, almost twin brother to the 878. Any other radios for those that would be interested in purchasing or getting into DMR? What would you recommend as the basic radio? And I'm sure that for some, cost would be a factor as well. What do you recommend?
Okay, I like, if you see here, the Anytone, that portable one, like many people have, Anytone also just came out with a mobile version of that radio, which is 50 watts. It's both 2 meter and 440, and it's also 1 1/4 meter, 220. The 220, it'll do DMR on all 3 of those frequencies. I don't think there's 220 repeaters, but that would be interesting. 220, it's very low power. It's only like 10, 15 watts, maybe even only 5 watts. I don't know. They just added that in there. And the other two, the 440 and the 2 meters, I think that's in 40, 50 watts or so. So I like that radio. It has, you can get it many different flavors. It has a APRS built in, true APRS, not digital APRS, but the real APRS, and has GPS built into it. Also, that particular model is around $400 if you don't want the GPS and the APRS. And it also has Bluetooth, so you can Bluetooth it into your car stereo, or if you have a speakerphone option, you can Bluetooth it into that, and they also give you a little push button thing you can Velcro onto your steering wheel as you're push to talk. So it's basically almost a hands-free. There's just a thing on your steering wheel you push to talk. So I like that. You can also, that push to talk also comes on the portable, on the HT version. So and if you don't want all the options, it goes down probably to $250, $300 if you don't want all the Bluetooth and the GPS, the GPS and the APRS. But that's the one I like. There are others. I don't know too much about them. You can also listen to DMR talk groups if you go to Brandmeister. If you go to Brandmeister on the internet, you can basically just listen in to the different DMR talk groups, which is interesting. I did that very early on. I would just listen to the talk groups before I had a DMR radio. I was like, what the heck is this going on? It's interesting. So then I bought myself a radio, and I could hear myself through the computer. But talking on the talk groups, yeah, that talk group on Tuesday night, they have a lot of for the Hudson Valley digital network. They have a lot of good information coming out there from Jim WA2W. No, WA2UMP. He has a lot of good information that he always has on Tuesday nights, and it's also on Echolink. You can look up that net, and you can get that net on Echolink. They're also, I believe, on All-Star.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Alex here in Schenectady. I have the 578 full-blown model, and it works perfect, except I had a problem with it on the DMR network that Jim hosts on Tuesday nights. It would lock up, and I couldn't receive anything. We couldn't figure out what it was. Turns out I have two DMR IDs, and I had the one DMR ID in the hotspot, and the 578 had the other one, and it confused the heck out of the DMR. So once I had the DMRs on the radio and the hotspot, it was fine. And Jim was the one that helped me out with that, because he's got a 578 also.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable. That's his thing. Very knowledgeable guy.
By the way, if I could just make a comment on the starter radios.
Okay, very good. Excellent.
Okay, well, if you are really economically strapped and want to get into the DMR for the lowest possible price, Radio Oddity again makes a device called the GD77S. It's got no visual display on it, but it does speak the frequency when you hit a button. That comes in at a price of around $76 or less. But what I would suggest, if you've got $100 to spend discretionary funds, get the full-blown GD77 radio from Radio Oddity, plus the Open GD77 software and firmware, which is free, because not only do you get all the features that Bob talked about that are in the other radios, but you get to be able to program on the fly your radio from the keyboard. And even if you're in a strange town and don't know anything about the repeaters, you can get on them without even knowing what talk groups you need to get on. Like, for example, you tune across a repeater and the radio comes on in a mode where it hears everything, and you hit a button on the radio and it picks out the talk groups that are on the repeater, populates the radio so that you can talk to those people without even knowing what talk groups they're on as you scan across the repeater. It's truly a game changer, and if I was going for that, I'd go for the GD7.
Very good. Good. That's good information there. Let's see. My TYT, I have a special firmware that allows you to do some special things, like if you put it into a promiscuous mode.
Yeah, same thing with the 77. Yeah, exactly the same thing.
You go into a promiscuous mode, and no matter what talk group it is, you'll be able to hear them, and it'll tell you what talk group it is. So therefore, you know, oh, that talk group's on that repeater, even though it wasn't published to anybody that it was there. So that can be very interesting. But you got to be careful with these firmwares that it doesn't do anything wrong in your radio. Hopefully it doesn't break it. So far mine has always been okay. If you want to get into some unusual, more technical stuff.
Well, I was always I'm always an experimenter, so I took the chance, and I figured, okay, I got the radio and might as well try it and see what happens, because that software looks so good. If I brick it, well, other people have put it in successfully, so I just took the leap of faith, plugged it into the computer, hit the button, and things worked flawlessly.
I did something one time. I put in some firmware into my radio, but looked it up on the internet, and they're like, oh, you could do a factory reset, and I got it back working again. So
You could do that with this stuff as well, because I saw factory reset in the software. So in lots of cases, you could use the saying, it's only software, and you could just do a flash and crash.
yeah, very good.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. Nevertheless, I will say the following. I just want to officially say thank you again to all of you here for joining us in this excellent presentation. Before I wrap up, Ed, any other type of announcements that we should let our participants know about? I know that next week is field day, and I know that some instructions and suggestions have gone out by our field day chairman, John, W2JLH. And I believe, and John, correct me if I am right or wrong, that we will have some sort of like a Zoom meeting for those that are interested in participating next week in field day.
Yes, we will have more directions going out and some suggestions. So hopefully we'll have FLARC out there in the pileups.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Ed, any other announcements?
No, just basically thanks everybody for coming. I like the idea of the special interest group, and obviously get in touch with Bob or with Nomar to, drop your call, and we'll put that together, which will be our third group coming out of our meeting about a month or so ago. So that's great. And the other thing too is, again, if you're interested, if you're not a member of the club and you're interested in joining, or at least see a copy of our newsletter, drop me a note at wx2r@arl.net, and I'll get a copy over there. So back to you, Nomar, for finals. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Dave.
Perfect.
And thank you, Bob. So
what I was going to suggest, officially, I'm going to say thank you to all, and you are free to leave